Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Nasir, and I will explain about what is realism. Realism is a literary movement that occurred during 1815 until 1900. It focused on giving a view of what was occurring at the time, on providing insight into what was truly going on in society. Realism is a literary style in which the author describes people, their action, their emotions, and surrounding as close to reality as possible. What caused the rise of realism? Several events and conditions lead to the rise of realism. Uh, 1. The Civil War. 2. Advance in technology. 3. Advances in science and education. And 4. Social change. The Civil War and realism. The Civil War was a major cause of the rise of realism in America. The Civil War influenced the beginning of American realism by Americans waiting to escape into an ideal world war, especially with all of the death and destruction from the war. They want to put an end to romanticism, and the sentimental tradition is associated with most women writers. The 4-year conflict destroyed the cities, industries, and lives, left bitter memories and economic desolation in South. Technology and realism. Technological advance also contributed to the rise of realism in America. Photography allowed people to see real, sometimes dismaying images of war and poverty. Telephones and coast-to-coast railways allowed more people than ever to hear about events and that affect the nations. Science, education, and realism. Advance in psychology, biology, and geology contradicted long-held beliefs about the nature, humans, the world, and the universe. More people, especially women, minorities, and poor, had access to an education and learned to read newspaper and the new mass circulation magazines were widely read. Newspaper and magazines became more popular and less expensive, which encouraged more to attend school and learn to read. Social change and realism. In 2065, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution outlawing slavery was ratified. As, industrialization led to overpopulation and poverty in the cities, especially for newly freed slaves and women. The agrarian economy of the South was devastated by the war and by the loss of slave labor. Many newly freed slaves and other Southerners moved to the northern cities looking for work. Industrialization led to overpopulation and poverty in the cities. Immigrants from strife-torn Europe arrived in great number. Northern cities grew quickly and without planning. Slums housed many of the new arrivals. Major genre or style. Magical realism, a style of literature that depicts mythology subject in a realistic manner. Literary realism, a literary movement stressing the depiction of contemporary life and society as it exists or existed. Ethnographic realism, a writing style that narrates the author's anthropological observations as if they were first-hand.
Okay, I will continue our presentation, and now I will explain about characteristics of realism. In the realism era, there are several characteristics of their literary works. First, character is more important than action and plot because their unidealized views of everyday life to use art as a social and political criticism. Second, characters have a real and complex motives and attitudes. Third, characters control their destinies. Fourth, the story provides reality through details at the character and environment. 5. Event will usually be real life with probable result typical of everyday life, unlike the romantic literature and larger than life heroes. Realistic stories avoid sensational and high drama. Last, most characters are middle class and their social class is important in the story. Realists tend to seek the truth in society and use personal experience to give their story a sense of authenticity. The story also lacks sensational or dramatic elements which make them more real or objective. Realism can be comical or matter-of-fact sounding and usually emphasizes to the character rather than the plot. The characters are often middle class or average people, making the story relatable to the majority of society. Since the story demonstrates detachment of the characters, most of them have unhappy endings to show the reality of life. I think enough for characteristic of realism. Thank you.
Hello everyone, it's Olivia here, and now we are going to continue the material about the major genres in realism periods or realism era. Well, after knowing the definition of realism, which is the realism is the reaction against the romanticism, a literary movement that focuses around feeling, imagination, and intuition. Realism is situated with true and depicted life and society as they were. We can say that realism is an opposite of romanticism because it focuses on ongoing society issues that should be not to be disregarded. And we know also about the characteristic that has been explained by my friend, and now we are going to know about the major genres in realism era. Well, the first one is magical realism. Well, magical realism is a style of literature that depicts mythological subject in realistic manner. And the second one is literary realism. Well, literary realism is a literary movement stressing the depiction of contemporary life and society as it exists and existed. And the third one is ethnographic realism. Well, ethnographic realism is a writing style that parades the author's anthropological. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fadlatul Nadia, and now I will continue my material in this group. My material is major authors, and the first author is Mark Twain. Mark Twain, considered one of the great American realist writers. Mark Twain is not only celebrated for the stories he tells, but also the way in which he tells them. With an unmatched ear for the English language and sensitivity to the diction of the common man. To flesh out of his stories, Twain also drew heavily on his personal experience, most notably his works as a riverboat captain on the Mississippi, and never shied from portraying everyday issues in starkly honest terms. And the second author is William Dean Howells. William Dean Howells, American writer and editor, was an influential critic and an important novelist of the late 19th century. His career spanned a period of radical change from Europa in American literature to realism as novelist, critic, and editor. He contributed greatly to those changes. His novels appeared almost every year from 1987 to 1921. He managed to write 6 autobiography studies, more than a dozen travel books, 4 volumes of poetry, numerous memoirs, biographies, and reviews. And the third author is Henry James. Henry James has been called the first of the great psychological realists in our time, honored as one of the great artists of the novel. He is also regarded as one of America's most influential critics and literary theorists. During the 50 years of his literary career, which spanned the period from the end of the American Civil War to the beginning of World War, James produced a body of tales and novels that fills 36 volumes and an almost equal number of volumes of non-fiction prose, including travel books, autobiography, books of criticism, letters, and literary notebooks. And the fourth author is Stephen Crane. Stephen Crane was America's first realistic writer who exposed the realities of war and other unfavorable conditions to every Native American audience. 100 years ago, people did not see the world in a quiet and open manner, as they do today. Those who lived in poverty, abuse, and other harsh conditions were finally exposed to America in 1893 by a 22-year-old college freelance writer who simply wished to show things as they appeared to him literally real. Crane is a well-known realist author, short story writer, and poetry. He wrote many short stories devoted to the Civil War and European wars. After going to Europe and staying with armies in order to create his fiction work, his realism expressed the harsh realities of war and fighting and emotional and intellectual response of people under extreme pressure. Okay, I think enough for me, and the next material will be continued with my friend.
Next, I, Shifa Salsabila, will continue to explain some of the literary works in the realism era from several authors in the previous slide that my friend has explained. First, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain is an immensely realistic novel revealing how a child's morals and actions clash with those of the society around him. Twain shows realism in almost every aspect of his writing. The description of the setting, that of the characters, and even the way characters speak. Twain also satirizes many of the foundations of that society, showing the hypocrisy of people involved in education, religion, and romanticism through absurd yet very real examples. Most importantly, Twain shows the way Huckleberry's moral beliefs were amidst a time of uncertainty in his life. Second, The Rise of Silas Lapham is a novel written by William Dean Howells in 1885 about the materialistic rise of Silas Lapham from rags to riches and his ensuing moral susceptibility. Silas earns a fortune in the paint business, but he lacks social standards, which he tries to attain through his daughter's marriage to the aristocratic Corey family. Silas' morality does not fail him. He loses his money, but makes the right moral decision when his partner proposes the unethical selling of the mills to English settlers. The last is The Red Badge of Courage. It's a war novel by Stephen Crane. The fictional story is about what it would be like to be a young man fighting in the middle of the American Civil War. It gives you an idea of what one's thoughts, feelings, and actions are during war. Crane does a great job at getting straight to the point in the most honest and real way possible. He describes a group of soldiers who are complete amateurs without exception. Each character in this story has such an individual and unique personality that adds depth to the war story. Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage employs the technique of realism. The technique allows readers to see realistic characters and situations rather than idealized heroes and glorified battle scenes. Crane's depictions of war shows the chaos of battle and the horror of death.